About a month ago, you may have seen a headline that said something to the effect of Chiquita Banana found guilty for sponsoring terrorist organizations in Colombia. And if you're like me, you saw that headline and said, what? So, as someone with way too much free time on his hands, I decided to see what that was all about. And after looking at the story of not only the court case, but the entire story of the company itself, I can safely say that funding a terrorist death squad is like the most normal thing they've ever done. Not only did this headline open up what is, in my opinion, one of the shadiest, most dastardly companies in American history, but it also opens up a whole web of wrongdoing with United States companies operating in Latin America. And more specifically, the nightmares of the banana trade itself, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Today, we're going to look at the history of the United Fruit Company, the company that would go on to become Chiquita Brands International, and how, as mentioned earlier, hiring paramilitary assassination squads is just a normal Monday for them. Allegedly. Actually, wait, I don't even have to say allegedly in this one. They were found guilty in court. Yeah, they did it. Duh. I have so much weird history to talk about. I swear the research for this video started off with just the court case, but then it became so much more. I don't know what this is going to bake out into, but I have to, explain this to someone. So you're welcome. So I'm going to start this word salad of a story that contains CIA coups, market manipulation and manipulation of advertising, and a whole lot of massacres right after the ad, which is me. I'm the ad for this one. I'm not kidding, look. By the time you're watching this, I'll be on the road for the tour of Stalker Shadow of the Zone. But even if you didn't get it on the tour, that doesn't mean you have to miss out on the fun. That's because right now, all of the merch that's available to buy in person at the tour is also available to order yourself. Among that merch, we have this adorable little guy, one of the Merc characters from the film. He even comes with his own movable gas mask and all the patches that the characters wear within the movie, and even these cute little night vision goggles on top. On top of that, we have this very stylish keyboard mat, because if we're gonna make a movie based on a video game, we might as well act like it. And what is a movie without a movie poster? The artwork for this poster being inspired by the main character from the film. So to get in on the poster, keyboard mat, or plush, be sure to head to the link in the description at innerspaceanomalies.shop. Thank you all so much for selling out as many tickets as you did for the tour, and thank you all for the support. It really does mean the world. On top of that, the shirt I'm wearing, the Do What You Will shirt with the cool, stylish, grunge, I'm totally punk design on the back, is available for 2 more weeks, maybe a week and a half, and then it's gone forever. So if you're interested in this as well, be sure to check it out at the link in the description at wendigoon.shop. I know there's a lot going on right now. You all have been a blessing. There's so many different projects that I have to shill for at once. That's why there's no ad this week, because just focusing on this. Thank you all so much for the support you've shown already. I really don't deserve it. And thank you for the support you continue to show. It means the world. So yeah, check out the shirt or the Stalker merch while you can at the links in the description. And really, thank you all for everything. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. To find out how a wholesome company like Chiquita can be found guilty last month of hiring assassins in Colombia, we need to start at the beginning. All the way back at the beginning of a company that would one day become Chiquita Brands International, the United Fruit Company. So it all starts in 1871 when a man named Henry Meigs is contracted by Costa Rica to build a railroad. An important thing to note about world history, and specifically like Central America and South America at this time, is that a lot of advancements were being made around the world all at once. Railroads already laid across the entire United States, and inventions like the telephone and the car would soon be expected of anyone in the industrial world. Because of that, countries like Costa Rica felt pressured to get with the times or else they'd be left behind. So in cases like what happened in 1871, they would overcommit to a project that they couldn't afford. 6 years after Henry's contracted to build the railroad, he would pass away, and his nephew, Minor C. Keith, would take over. Keith realizes quickly that Costa Rica doesn't have the money to pay him, so he starts making deals with the country. Among these deals, Keith is given a 99-year lease to the operations of the railroad, as well as 800,000 acres of property in Costa Rica. So Keith goes from just building a railroad to now owning the operations of it. Well, it turned out that owning the operation of the Costa Rican Railroad didn't contribute to that much money. But what he found did contribute was bananas. See, originally during the railroad's construction, Keith would have bananas grown in the area to just feed the workers. because bananas were comparatively cheap to grow and grew naturally in Central America. Well, to Keith's luck, at the same time he acquired this railroad lease and 800,000 acres of land, bananas were becoming all the rage in the United States. As a matter of fact, they were so popular in places like New York City that the police commissioner made it a finable offense to leave a banana peel in public because so many people were slipping on them. Also, that police commissioner was Teddy Roosevelt. I'm not kidding. Now, the biggest problem with transporting bananas at the time is industrial refrigeration didn't exist yet. So at the time you pulled the banana from the tree, you had a very short window to get it sold on a market. This would be a very hard feat to achieve unless you owned your own railroad. So Keith's company, Tropical Trading and Transport, would pick all the bananas, load them onto a railroad track, and then take them to the port all in-house through Keith's operation. However, the next problem he had was transporting the bananas across the water back to the United States. Keith's main competitor with this was a company called Boston Fruit Co., a company that owned a lot of the boats and was growing their bananas in the West Indies. Keith became frustrated with this agreement because anytime he wanted to move his product, he had to rely on someone else's boats to do it, and eventually decided if you can't beat them, join them. So the Tropical Trading and Transportation Company merged with the Boston Fruit Company to create the United Fruit Company. Not only that, but their lawyer, who would eventually become the director of the United Fruit Company, Bradley Palmer, decided that they should buy stock in their competitors as well. So for a time, United Fruit Company owned 80% of all banana trades into the United States. And as soon as they had this money, they kept expanding their operation. They bought land and built railroad across Central America into the northern part of South America. By 1900, it's hard to explain how big United Fruit was. Like, sure, there's companies that are bigger today like Amazon, but because of the way we as the public receive information, there's so many routes around them. Whereas back in 1900, United Fruit kind of decided what their image would be, as well as even the image of the countries that they ship product from. Like, for example, they started something called the Great White Fleet, which was named after the military's Great White Fleet. These were, as the name implies, really big ships that were painted white and used to ship bananas to the United States. This Great White Fleet would take groups of 50 to 100 people and tour them around the Caribbean. This not only promoted the name of United Fruit, but also was the first example of a Caribbean cruise. And United Fruit can be credited with sparking that entire avenue of culture as well. Like in 1901, Guatemala just had them start running the mail. No joke, because United Fruit owned all of the railways and had all of the infrastructure for the country, Guatemala just decided to contract them to, decide where letters go. In 1913, they created the Tropical Radio and Telegraph Company, which managed all of the radio and telegraph broadcasts throughout Central America. In 1930, they were the largest employer out of anyone in the entirety of Central America. And when I say they owned everything, I mean they owned everything. They owned the land, they owned the food, they owned the transportation, and they owned the people that were on the land as well. If you've heard all of this describing United Fruit Company and you hoped that they were at least kind of nice to their workers, then that's really cute, and I hope the world doesn't hurt you. The way United Fruit Company treated their workers in Central and South America is pretty monstrous. Not only were workers subjected to 7-day work days, and they would be paid the equivalent of like $1.30, but not even in normal money, in company vouchers that they could only spend at company locations. But the work itself was hard and brutal, and if you became injured, you were completely unpaid for any of the time lost. If you became ill, there weren't any facilities at work sites to treat you, at least nothing permanent, and if you left to get treated, then that was pretty much considered desertion and someone else would come take your job. What this also meant for local governments is without United Fruit Company, they have no infrastructure, so the government can't really tell them to do anything about it. Think of it this way, say you're the Costa Rican government and you do care about what your workers are going through. Well, if you impose any kind of fine or serious restriction on United Fruit for the way they're treating the workers, then at any point, United Fruit can just take their ball and go home. They own the railroads, they own the radios, they own the post office. They can either charge you an exorbitant fee for using it or just not allow you to use it altogether. So unless you want the entire country to fall into poverty, you kind of have to play along. Now, this is also a very favorable look to local governments, considering a lot of these officials were also being paid off and didn't really care about the issues United Fruit was creating. But suffice to say, even if they did care, not a lot could be done. I also want to emphasize I'm kind of oversimplifying by saying that it was just United Fruit Company and ergo Chiquita Bananas that's responsible for all this. When in reality, there were several large companies that were doing the same thing to different degrees in different places. Even other fruit companies, like companies that would eventually become Dole, all had a hand in this pie. I'm mainly just picking on United Fruit Company because, for one, they're one of the largest to have done it, two, their name gets brought up the most when you're talking about these historic instances, and three, they're the guys who, once again, have an actual guilty conviction. But just assume all circumstances in Latin America are bad at this time because they pretty much were. As a matter of fact, it was these conditions that caused the author O. Henry to coin the term Banana Republic, which effectively became a slang term for any area where a small percentage of elite commandeer a very large and abused working class in order to turn a profit or create a good. Which makes it extra funny that a company decided to name their clothing brand that. I don't have anything against Banana Republic. As a matter of fact, this is one of their shirts, and it's very comfortable, but it's just so wild to me that you would hear that whole history and be like, yeah, we'll name our industry after that, why not? Well, while all the heads of the corporation are having a great time and officials are either willingly or unwillingly turning a blind eye to what the United Fruit Company is doing, the workers are not as happy with the arrangement and begin to protest. Around this time, a nickname began to pop up for the United Fruit Company. Locals referred to it as the octopus because it has an arm in everything the country does. And in the early 1900s, a lot of worker strikes happened. You can imagine how United Fruit felt about that. Initially, it started out small with unionizers convincing one company town at a time to revolt against their working conditions. But the first really big demonstration would come in 1928. It was then in the town of Ciénaga, Colombia, that a whole lot of workers decided to complain at once. When you look at what the workers of this strike were protesting, it would be comedic had it not happened to actual people. Like, among their list of demands was a 6-day work week as opposed to a 7-day work week, improvement of hospital services, weekly wages, and abolition of office stores, meaning they're paid with real money instead of vouchers. The strike began on November the 12th, and it seems that rather than hearing the workers out, United Fruit Company decided to get Dad involved. Communism was not as scary to the United States as it would become post-World War II, but it was still in the minds of the American government. So United Fruit Company framed this entire operation to be a sort of communist revolution, and the United States was threatening to get involved. This caused the Colombian army to jump into action, and they immediately sent about 700 troops into the town. On December 6th of 1928, there was about 1,500 protesters camped out within the town. At one point, General Vargas gives the order to fire. It is not known exactly how many people died in the ensuing massacre. Estimates are anywhere from 47 people to 2,000. General Vargas would later say he did this to ensure the safety of Colombia as he feared an American invasion. While 47 bodies are confirmed, the reason the number may be as high as 1,000 is because of the message sent from the U.S. Embassy. From this message, we know not only that the United States knew about this, but that it was considered a great success. This event is remembered to this day as the Banana Massacre. And believe it or not, it is not the only massacre we're going to get to in this story. Well, 6 years later, the United Fruit Company gets another massive strike, and this time it's too many people to, just shoot all of them. The 1934 demonstration managed to amass over 100,000 workers across different company towns and different vocations. And most of what they were protesting for was the same thing at the Banana Massacre. They were protesting for safer working conditions, a new minimum wage. United Fruit Company tries to do the same thing they did at the Banana Massacre. They say that it is a communist takeover. They begin deporting a lot of people, but in a few weeks they give up. This 1934 protest is forever known as the Great Banana Strike. The protest began on August the 9th and ended on August the 28th, with United Fruit Company saying they would agree to the demands. However, as soon as the mob has dissipated, the United Fruit Company simply doesn't do that. Despite saying they'd agree to the demands, and the government even enacting some new laws around workers' rights, United Fruit Company just doesn't do anything, and when another strike begins to start up, this time they've identified all of the strike leaders, and they are all either imprisoned or disappear. And by this time in the 1930s, the United Fruit Company owns 3.5 million acres of land in Central America. And in places like Guatemala, they're the majority landowner. In Guatemala specifically, they own about 20% of all the land. Meaning you can just look at a picture of Guatemala and point at it, and there is a 1 in 5 chance that you're pointing at United Fruit Company land. So for several years, this just continued. The United Fruit Company had the market cornered, and anytime the workers had something to say about it, the resistance quickly fizzled out. Every now and then, a country would try to enact new labor laws and either just fine United Fruit Company, or United Fruit Company would counter them with being targeted. Like for example, when a law would come that would apply to companies with over 500 workers, they would argue that they're the only people in the area with over 500 workers, so it's targeted harassment. It was in 1944 that the Chiquita brand would come to exist, the Chiquita name applying specifically to their bananas. The mascot for this Chiquita banana being a banana woman with a bowl of fruit on her head, as well as a catchy jingle that played in my head every time I read about a new massacre. The next big event in this entire story would happen in 1952. And the set piece for one of the wildest things United Fruit Company would ever do, as well as the CIA, is Guatemala. See, in the previous couple years, a lot of worker strikes had started at United Fruit Company properties in Guatemala. The things they were striking for are once again absurd and also sad, like $1.50 wage per day, or allowance for funerals when workers die in accidents, or compensation for families when workers die in accidents. Like that, what an insane place to be in, where you're begging not to not die at work, just to not also go broke when you die at work. Well, it was around this time that Guatemala just got democracy, and one of the first presidents they elect is Jacobo Arbenz, the founder of the Guatemalan Party of Labor. Now, Arbenz has a lot of dangerous things like ideas. And among these dangerous ideas, one of them is that workers shouldn't die at work. A lot of the things Arbenz tried to institute was reasonable working conditions, reasonable work hours, and of course one of his biggest targets was the United Fruit Company. At the time Arbenz became president, the United Fruit Company was making twice as much revenue as the country of Guatemala. And even more infuriating, when looking at the totality of the land the United Fruit Company owned in Guatemala, they were using about 15% of it. And if you'll remember, United Fruit Company owned more land in Guatemala than anyone else. Again, about 20% of the country, and they were only using 15% of that 20%. At the same time, Guatemala was going through a housing crisis. Cities were being overcrowded, so Arbenz makes a decision. He, being the government, forcibly buys 200,000 acres of the land owned by United Fruit Company, buying it from the United Fruit Company at about $3 an acre, and immediately begins using that land for those that are landless. So the United Fruit Company looks at this. This is really the first time they've been told no by a government establishment. Sure, people in a country had protested against them before, but you can just shoot those. Entire governments are a bit more complicated. So what does the United Fruit Company do except go get dad again? Remember how back during the 20s they were able to convince the United States to threaten a takeover at just the mere mention of the word communism? Well, now it's the 1950s and everyone is terrified of communism. And the leader of a country that an American company is operating in has now seized their land and distributed it to the people. Sam O'Nella also made a video about this, well, banana republics in general, so I'll let you hear his version of how the conversation probably went.
Oh, Eisenhower. Yo, what's up? This Jacobo guy, he's making us pay minimum wages. Well, that doesn't sound very good for business. That's not all, though. He's also taking our unused land and giving it back to the people. Does that sound familiar? Oh dear, you don't think. By the way it's looking, Dwight, I'd say he's a dirty, oh god, collectivizing, no, commie. Commie! Commie! Yeah, go get him, Dwight.
President Truman in 1952 signed off on something called Operation PB Fortune. This was a CIA operation to topple the Guatemalan government. It began at the end of Truman's presidency, and Eisenhower was the one who oversaw most of the operations around it. The way this coup went down is the CIA found a man named Carlos Castillo Armas, a former Guatemalan who was in exile after trying to take over the government. Armas was sympathetic to the United States, and that was good enough for the CIA, so they began to train him and his men and supply him with money and weapons to overthrow the Guatemalan government. So even though United States soldiers were never on the ground, we provided the training and weapons to the soldiers who were on the ground. Among these weapons was planes and bombs, meaning that the United States is directly responsible for the bombing of Guatemala City as a part of the 1952 coup. One of the people in Guatemala at the time was a 25-year-old kid named Che Guevara. So I wonder how this event went on to shape his opinion of the United States. The United States also conducted a very large propaganda campaign leading up to the coup, where they would play radio broadcasts or have flyers and their normal rigmarole to convince the local people that this is actually good for them. So much so that when Armas's forces got to the capital, a lot of the soldiers for the Guatemalan military simply surrendered. With that, Arbenz stepped down, and Armas, 10 days later, became the dictator of Guatemala. One of the first things Armas did was execute everyone. Armas knew that he had a lot of political enemies in the country, people who couldn't be swayed by the psychological operations of the United States. He began to round up those that opposed him, and in the first few months of his dictatorship, executed about 3,000 to 5,000 people. About 1,000 of those executed were people who spoke out or protested against the United Fruit Company. A few years later, in 1957, a revolutionary would run up to Armas as he was walking with his wife, shooting him twice and killing him before the gunman turned the gun on himself. This vacuum of power would lead to Guatemalan conflict for decades to come, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, all because the United Fruit Company didn't want to help their workers out. And again, by United Fruit Company, in reality, it's a lot of companies that were all agreeable to this at the time. It just makes me feel better to imagine there's only one monster out there. In 1999, Bill Clinton apologized to the country of Guatemala for the United States' role in this coup. So, right in the nick of time. And in 2011, the government of Guatemala officially apologized to the Arbenz family for the desecration and smearing they had of Arbenz while he was in office. Because, as a part of the psychological operations, they needed the guy they wanted out of power to look bad. So the CIA ran all kinds of smear campaigns against him. I should also clarify, if Bill Clinton apologizing to the country doesn't do it enough, none of this is conspiratorial. These are all declassified documents now. You can just read about how we overthrew a government because they didn't want workers to once again die in our fruit company. I should also mention that during this time, the owners or the chief board members or executives or whatever of United Fruit Company, they kept changing in and out. And in 1970, the majority of shares of the company were acquired by a man named Eli Black. Eli Black became the CEO of United Fruit Company and decided to merge it with his company, American Seal Cap. These two companies came together to make United Brands Company. However, Eli Black immediately ran into a problem. So it seemed that Black's plan was to use the money and revenue that United Fruit Company had on hand to help his company, American Seal Cap, and continue their, business into the future. However, when he got a hold of United Fruit Company, there wasn't as much money as he thought there'd be. And you may hear that and be confused. I've spent this entire video talking about how United Fruit Company owned everything. They had every market in Central and South America cornered. How could they be out of money? Well, quite poetically, the reason they were out of money is because of themselves. So, as I mentioned way earlier in the video, come 1800s, everyone in America loves bananas. They can't get enough. Well, something that anyone who knows anything about bananas could tell you is there isn't just one kind of banana. Bananas come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors, and that is something that the American consumer doesn't like. 99% of you, when you hear the word banana, think of the regular shaped banana that is the regular color yellow. Well, as it turns out, that's just one kind of banana. As a matter of fact, it's the kind that was mass produced by United Fruit Company. And United Fruit Company did everything in their power to make sure every banana they put out was the exact same. That way they could fit perfectly into the shipping boxes they needed to be fitted into, and then fit perfectly into the image the American consumer had in mind. Well, what anyone who knows anything about biology, and I'm sure hundreds of people were screaming at the executives of United Fruit Company at this time, what any one of them could tell you is that genetic diversity is a good thing. See, when we talk about it as a product and something to be shipped and eaten, we're not really thinking about the livelihood or the biological well-being of this plant. But a plant, just like anything, can grow, it can die, and in this case, it can get sick. In the 1950s, something called Panama disease began to hit several of the banana plantations across Central and South America. Now, normally if a plant gets sick, it's okay, because even if the disease has found a way to attack that one plant, the plant next to it is genetically diverse enough that it's not a one-for-one transfer. But when you're the United Fruit Company and you've spent the past 60 years making sure every single one of your bananas is the exact same, well then it is a one-to-one transfer. It's a one-to-one. How many bananas would there be? It's like, gotta be in the trillions. It's a 1-to-1 trillion transfer. This hurt the banana market in a big way. So United Fruit Company, and again, other banana salesmen, that's a funny word, I don't know. Other banana companies had spent a lot of energy into marketing the idea of the normal yellow banana into the public consciousness. They would pay cereal companies like Kellogg's to show pictures of bananas cut up in cereal, or they would pay movies or TV shows or whatever to subliminally insert the idea of bananas being a part of a balanced breakfast. It's funny because this is now the second video about corporations and the government subtly filling your mind with food you're supposed to eat, and it's also the second video about a bunch of corporate leaders who don't understand how plants work, failing to grow said plants in the South or Central Americas. Well, now all of that subliminal messaging is undone because now the bananas are going to be different. After several years, the banana producers begin to mass produce a new kind of banana, and while that's the banana we come to know and love today, and it seems to fit in, a lot of the damage had been done. It took a lot of money and resources to get a new production scale for a new kind of banana running, and in the meantime, they were now running so many other branches of the world economy that it was hemorrhaging them money. And now back to our story, this is the position Eli Black found himself in 1970. It seems after several years, Eli Black was not able to consolidate the loss of money with, getting more money. And on February the 3rd of 1975, he would throw himself from his 44th floor office building. It was also found shortly after his death that he had sent a bribe of $1.25 million to the president of Honduras with the promise of another $1.25 million if the president would effectively give them a tax break. Now, is it because Eli Black knew he'd be found out for this, or because of dire financial straits that he jumped? We don't know, but either way, finances are what caused the issue. Eventually, Carl Linder Jr., one of the richest billionaires or whatever in the world, would acquire the company. Since United Fruit Company was associated with all the company towns and massacres back in South and Central America, and since United Brands was associated with the thing that just happened with Eli Black, Linder decides to rename the company to the product it is most famous for, the Chiquita banana. So in 1990, the company is renamed to Chiquita Brands International. So now if you're hearing all of that and you're thinking, oh, okay, so, the company had a sordid history and now we're in the modern age and they've calmed down, right? Well, it's around this time in 1990 that they're now Chiquita Brands International that something known as the Banana Wars begin. Effectively, Chiquita had a competitor named Fifes who was doing better, and Chiquita didn't like that. So rather than, doing better at their own business, Chiquita just decided to play dirty. They would periodically have Fife's bananas seized for inspection, and then when, oh look, the bananas have gone rotten after setting in a waiting place for a week, who knew? They would just throw them out. Again, Chiquita has their hands in so much of the infrastructure, they can have stuff checked out or seized at a moment's notice. Fife estimated that damages done during these banana wars resulted in as much as $10 million. As a matter of fact, it was so bad that Fife's manager filed a lawsuit against Chiquita, saying that Chiquita had put out a false arrest warrant for him, and that if the manager was arrested, he would be kidnapped and murdered. Which, you know what? I believe him. I don't need to see any of the evidence or his reasoning for this. You think Chiquita's going to kill you because you're doing better than them at money? Probably. I feel weird making this video over a banana company. Not because of the CIA stuff, not talking about government stuff, a banana company. That's what has me worried. You want to know the wildest thing about it? Craziest part about me making a video about a banana company? I'm allergic to bananas. I have a mild banana allergy. I can eat some things with banana in it, but if I eat a banana directly, it makes like my lips swell up and like my mouth burns. I don't like it. So I could hypothetically die by banana. And that, I mean, that doesn't relate to anything, but I'm sure you all will find something funny to say about that. But yeah, like this guy thinking that Chiquita is gonna kill him. I mean, yeah, dude, me too. They're gonna make me eat a banana or something, I don't know. What's really funny is in 2014, there was a proposed merger between Chiquita and Fife's that ended up falling through. But it reminds me of back at the beginning of this story when the Tropical Trading Company and the Boston Fruit Company like hated each other a lot. So they hated each other so much that they like kissed and merged businesses. That's what this reminds me of, that they threatened to kill Fife's manager and then they thought about becoming one thing. Or sorry, I should clarify, they didn't threaten to kill him. He claims that they were going to, allegedly in Minecraft, whatever. I should also mention before all of this, in 1987, their logo that was an entire banana woman with a fruit basket on her head just became a normal woman with a fruit basket on her head. That doesn't really relate to the conspiracy or story or anything. I just really didn't like that banana lady. So this is better. Now, a lot of Chiquita history's past was kind of outside of the public mind until 1998. It was then that Michael Gallagher for the Cincinnati Enquirer published an article called Chiquita Secrets Revealed. This alleged that Chiquita was responsible for everything from drug trafficking to weapon trafficking to coups, as mentioned earlier, as well as several political assassinations. However, the article would become discredited when it was found out that Gallagher had broken into Chiquita's answering machine in order to get a lot of his information. He was accused of taking a lot of things out of context and, being unprofessional as a journalist, and Chiquita ended up suing the Cincinnati Enquirer and winning about $10 million. Because of this, the Enquirer printed a retraction, and a lot of the details of that article are now considered like uncouth, because he was exposed for stealing the information. But a lot of people look at the information they presented and say, in spite of how he went about getting it, it's still true, which possibly, maybe, who knows, allegedly, whatever. The story in itself made a lot of people dig, and old information like what I've talked about up until this point in the video started to get passed around. The CIA protecting bananas through revolutions and whatnot. Now, after all of that backstory's out of the way, we can talk about the death squads. Yeah, the article title that I saw that inspired this entire rabbit hole of discovery. I am now going to talk about the thing that article was about. Now, Colombia is a country with a very complicated political past. A lot of revolutions and assassinations and whatnot that are too much to get into this late into the video. All you need to know for now is that there are a lot of both left and right-wing organizations in the country that hate each other a lot. A lot of stories of one party gaining power and massacring everyone on the other side, and then that side gaining power 20 years later and massacring everyone on the other side, and that just goes back and forward. Well, in spite of Colombia having this turbulent environment, there's a lot of companies that want to do business there. And while several companies can be found guilty of the thing I'm about to talk about, again, Chiquita is the one that was found guilty in court. It was found that in the late 90s and early 2000s, Chiquita was paying a group known as the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. What are the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia? Well, they're a group founded by Carlos Castaño Gil. And yes, he's one of the characters in the TV show Narcos. When Carlos was a young boy, he watched his father be killed by the, at the time, left-wing militants who were controlling Colombia. So, as mentioned earlier, he became one of the right-wing militants to control Colombia. He partnered with the cartel and even people like Pablo Escobar to maintain physical power through violence within Colombia. This mostly materialized in brutally killing anyone who opposed his regime. Or really, since the self-defense force was a gun for hire, anyone who opposed the regime he was working for at that moment. Sometimes this would be a stereotypical security service, and other times it was executing people who opposed whatever you were doing. So if he was hired by a local business or cartel, that meant executing people who did things like unionize or not like the cartel. Despite being a sort of gun for hire, the United Self-Defense Force was explicitly right-wing because, as mentioned, not only did they work for a lot of companies to dispel things like trade unions, Carlos explicitly said that they would just kill anyone who was a unionist. The United Self-Defense Force was responsible for a little thing called the Mapurepan massacre. And what is that, you may ask? Well, I don't know. Let's check out the wiki. Right here we have a summary. It says, on July the 15th, 1997, the paramilitaries, which is, the United Self-Defense Force, arrived at Mapurepan, where they used chainsaws and machetes to murder, behead, dismember, and disembowel civilians. Because the bodies were thrown into a river, it is unknown exactly how many people died, but the United States Department of State stated in 2003 that at least 30 civilians were killed. So, anyway, this is the company Chiquita was hiring. As a matter of fact, it was found out that they had paid the United Self-Defense Force $1.7 million over the course of 10 years. The Colombian government had a securities company called Convivir, which was basically a way for companies to hire protection or security for their employees within the country. It was through this company that Chiquita paid out the money to the United Self-Defense Force. Chiquita's reason for this was that they were just hiring the company for the protection of their workers in Colombia, and that they had no knowledge of the more illicit doings of the company outside of their security contracting. However, we know for a fact this is not true because in 2001, the United Self-Defense Force was labeled as a terrorist organization by the United States, and internal memos at Chiquita say that the company was explicitly told to stop paying them. It was after this issuing of them as a terrorist organization that about half of the money was sent out. Immediately, Chiquita was found of wrongdoing by the United States Justice Department and ordered to pay out $25 million. Colombia's Attorney General said that this was not enough, obviously, and furthermore accused Chiquita of using their ships to smuggle thousands of AK-47s and millions of rounds of ammunition. Which, at this point, absolutely. Allegedly, that hasn't been proven in court yet or anything, but hypothetically, could totally see it. As part of Chiquita's defense, they also hired two other left-wing extreme militant groups to guard other pieces of their employees, which doesn't excuse anything that's happened so far, but also that just means that you play the field. You don't care where the money goes as long as you get what you want out of it. Likely just shopping for the cheapest option. A note that was found written by one of the executives at Chiquita described this as, quote, the cost of doing business in Colombia. For several years, the family members of those killed by the terrorist organization sought damages from Chiquita because, they probably wouldn't have been able to cause the damage they did had it not been for Chiquita's money. In 2014, a lawsuit of some 4,000 family members was thrown out as it was seen they didn't have jurisdiction over a United States-based company. I should also mention in 2014, Chiquita was lobbying against the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act because they knew that it 100% included them. In 2016, a judge named Kenneth Mara of Southern Florida decided to give this whole suit another look. Under his ruling, it was right for family members to sue for damages, at least within the United States. And in 2018, Chiquita and the family members came to an agreement. Also in 2018, the country of Colombia filed charges on 13 executives at Chiquita that they said were responsible for, the whole paying off terrorists thing. Nothing yet has come of this, and I really doubt anything will. The United States doesn't love sending American citizens to other countries to be tried by their legal system. And so far, all that's come out of this is like 8 people at Chiquita got fired, and other than that, and whatever the private agreement was with the family members in the suit, we don't know what happened, again, up until a month ago. That's because last month, in June of 2024, a federal jury under the same judge, Kenneth Mara, found Chiquita to be guilty in the wrongful death of 8 people killed by the Colombian terrorist organization. Now, of course, the actual effects of this organization were far, far more, but that's at least 8 that can be directly pinned as partially caused by Chiquita. Chiquita was ordered to pay out $38.3 million to the families affected. Of course, a very small touch for the lives that they lost and the years they spent in courts trying to make something of it. But hopefully, it sets a sort of precedence. Maybe then other things the company's done can be tried. Maybe other victims can come forward and get a piece of what they deserve out of it. Maybe even other companies that did similar things can be brought into the light. It certainly sets a precedence for crimes of 2nd or 3rd degree that, Chiquita just paid off this group. They didn't commit the crime, but here, seeing that they were held accountable for it, maybe that's good news for whatever comes in the future. I certainly hope so, at least. The story, at whatever way you look at it, is tragic, that this much success can be made off of this much blood. It's wild to think at the same time Bill Clinton was apologizing to the country of Guatemala for what the CIA did back in the 1950s. At the same time, that same company was hiring death squads within Colombia in order to protect their business. The same story told over and over again. So hopefully, I like to think at least, as we say sorry this time, we're not making another mistake once again. Even though we probably are, and then some other YouTuber or whatever the equivalent of YouTube is in 40 years, I'm going to talk about the stupid thing that's happening right now that's going to make me upset. But whatever, I've done my part. That's his problem. At the end of the day, I'm just a stupid YouTuber, and I think that this stuff is interesting, if not depressing, to learn about. And if I had to know about all of this, then you do too. And if nothing else, you can at least point to the banana brand at a grocery store and have an absolutely horrible story to traumatize your family. And you're welcome for that. And I just want to say thank you for watching. Again, this literally started with a headline I saw a month ago and led to all of this. So I think a lot of you guys like the weird, out of nowhere, conspiracy, insane rabbit holes, even though this isn't a conspiracy. It's just a thing that exists that people need to talk about. But I think you all enjoy this kind of thing, and I hope you did. And if so, thank you. It really does mean the most. As mentioned earlier in the ad, at the time you're watching this, I will be in New York meeting you guys. The first event I've ever gone to is Wendigoon. That's so weird. Hopefully I'm not dead. But I guess you'll know before I do here now. Isn't that strange? So, I can't wait to meet you guys, can't wait to hang out, and really, thank you for the opportunity to do this. As a dumb college dropout, it's hard to process, but it's all thanks to you guys, and thank you. It means the most. As mentioned, the tour merch is available for a very limited amount of time at the link in the description. Check that out if you're interested, and the Do With That What You Will t-shirt is also available for, at the time you're watching this, maybe 2 weeks, week and a half, whatever I said in the intro of the ad. So get that as well if you want. Thank you all so much for the support. And even if you never buy a thing, even if you can't, even if you don't want to, I completely understand. Just thank you for watching the videos. You don't know how much that supports me. The reason I have any of this success, am able to do this for a job, able to go on tour and put out dumb t-shirts or whatever, it's because of you guys who just click on stuff. And it means a lot, so thank you. So anyway, that spiel out of the way, I'm going to get packed and get to meeting you guys. And like I said, hopefully I don't die. But hey, if I did, I've had a great run. So thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Don't bring me a banana. I don't want it.